Zach Osterman from the Indy Stars. Zach, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good. How about you?
I cannot complain. Down in Montverde, Florida, watching the Invitational, and I'm wearing shorts and a T-shirt,
There you
so
go.
I am happy as can be, because
There
I
you
know that
go.
that's going to be short-lived.
Yeah. Once you
Uh,
come back, it's
it's
positively
over.
tropical here. It's 41 degrees and raining.
Hey, I'll take that over 1 degrees and raining. Of course, that
Yeah,
wouldn't be
no kidding.
happening, but Indiana, of course, on the road this weekend in Champaign with a uh, virtually every game you could say this for as they finish the season, but a almost must win. I don't know if I put the must win, but really, really, really need to win. You can put that tag on this game. I was just talking before you joined us that, if nothing else, I think you're going to see win or lose. Is this team still fighting? Are they still fighting for the prize and trying to get there? Um, and then you've got Xavier. What is his mindset, knowing that his final season is teetering on the brink here, and he worked very hard to get back, and then only to have yet another injury and to set that back. So there's a lot of things that are going on in the old cabeza for these guys.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not a must win, I think it's fair to say, I said this on our podcast, it feels like it's a must perform. I think, your point about just kind of needing maybe to show a certain something. Um, they've had 8 days, after a couple of pretty chastening defeats. You recognize Purdue and Wisconsin were favorites in those games. But nevertheless, the way they played out, kind of told a certain story. And I think that, at minimum, it feels like the sort of game where Indiana, as you say, has to kind of show that it's still got the fire in the belly to make something out of the season. That doesn't mean necessarily that it will, but I think everybody needs to have had, kind of a conversation almost with themselves. And I think this comes down to, every individual player and then maybe some sort of collective, just kind of a, what do you want out of the rest of this season? Whether you're obviously the answer is going to be different for an Xavier Johnson, who's in his sixth and final year of college, one he didn't expect, from a Kalel Ware, who I think we can all understandably recognize is probably bound for the NBA draft after this season, to a captain like Trey Galloway, whoever it might be. This needed to be a week where Indiana kind of figured out, individually and collectively, what do we want out of this season and how hard are we willing to fight for it? And I think Saturday is going to be a real sort of stress test of that.
Yeah, and a big reason for that listed in your piece that you have out right now on I use talking points. They're soul searching, as Mike Whitson said in the presser yesterday. But it's not just that the games are getting less with 12 remaining. It's that big letter Q and the number 1 that is looming large over Indiana, because right next to that or under that is a big old fat goose egg. And the opportunities to get that are even slimmer than the remaining games that they have.
Yeah, I mean, yes, from just a practical sort of NCAA tournament standpoint, you've got to start somewhere. Indiana, I think, has got what? I think I don't know if you said it's 2 quad 2 wins. I think that's the best they've got right now. And there aren't a lot of quad 1 opportunities left, and that's a little bit the nature of the conference. It's a little bit the nature of the fact that it's January 26th or whatever it is. You don't, the seasons don't get to run on forever until everybody gets what they want. Indiana's got to find a way to start, putting together some of those wins. And, listen, it's it's 2 completely different teams, 2 completely different seasons. The trip to Illinois last year was kind of a get right experience for Indiana. They'd lost the 3 in a row to restart Big Ten play. they beat a pretty pedestrian Wisconsin team at home. It was when they went on the road to Illinois, and I mean they led that game by double digits for most of the game, certainly most of the second half, not all the second half. I'm struggling to remember the exact complexion of it, but that was kind of the game that it felt like, signaled kind of Indiana turning its season around. Or maybe not turning its season around might be strong, more just kind of like pointing its season in the direction that it eventually went in. This game kind of needs to be something similar. And again, I don't know if Indiana needs to win it, but I think Indiana at least needs to sort of get to a place where it is proving that it can compete with these teams, because it's going to have to beat some of them eventually. Or, we know what will happen. We will all be home in March.
Absolutely. And from what we've seen so far, it's hard for us to imagine that happening, but it's not to say that it cannot happen. If it's a lot goes on in the mental psyche, whether this team can, whatever separation has been amongst them, and I don't mean personally, but come together as a team or not, that's going to show itself, and that's what's going to have to happen. And part of that, though, is also having Kalel Ware, and whether or not you have a healthy Kalel Ware also goes a long way on how this Indiana team goes.
Yeah, I mean, with this matchup in particular, it's kind of a funny one because, Mike Woodson has said, I think multiple times this week, Illinois plays small. They've gone small. I mean, you look at like Dane Danger barely plays for them now. I mean, he was a guy who was kind of a centerpiece for them in the post last year. Maybe not the way that Trace Jackson Davis was, but I mean, he was a regular for them. I think he had 1 minute against Northwestern. They do play a lot smaller. I mean, a lot smaller, and they spread you out. They try to shoot you out of the gym. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think you could see in the Northwestern game, for example, it probably didn't help their defensive effort, overall. But I think that, if I'm not saying Indiana shouldn't play Kalel Ware, I would say that in my experience, watching obviously a lot of college basketball, when teams go small and teams try to counter that by going big, going small usually works better. The team that goes small usually has more success with it. So it might be a funky one for Indiana's rotations anyway, I guess is my point. But the broader question of getting Kalel Ware back is, without a doubt going to be something really important for this team. I think he sets this team defensively in a lot of ways. I think Mike Woodson's bigs have always kind of done that. He's obviously this team's best rebounder. He's I would argue, one of this team's biggest matchup, threats, because he can take, slower, less athletic bigs out to the perimeter. He's the player that Indiana likes to use most in pick and roll situations. So, just getting him back, I mean, he's fundamental to what Indiana wants to do at both ends of the floor, and getting him back is important.
And in Illinois, you have a team that was learning to play without Terrence Shannon Jr. and doing a decent job at it. Then they get Terrence Shannon Jr. back, and he scored 16 points in their last outing against Rutgers, but is whatever little bit of rust that he may have had will certainly be knocked off, and Indiana will be facing a full force Illinois team.
Yeah, and also not unlike Wisconsin, facing an Illinois team that will be smarting from, an unexpected road upset. And I know it's a little bit different. Wisconsin obviously lost at Penn State, struggled defensively, whereas, Illinois Northwestern is always going to be a bit of a funky game. It's a rivalry game. Illinois has had a bit of a sticky time in Evanston, kind of as often as not the last few years. But the point is, you're not going to catch them cold. You're going to get an Illinois team who presumably will have been sharpened by the frustration of losing a rivalry game on the road. That if you look at kind of the complexion of that game, and Illinois probably should have won it, even if you just kind of look at maybe the last, where they were with 5 minutes to go, where they were with 2 minutes to go, etc. So, I mean, it's, I don't know if it's necessarily the proverbial good time to be playing Illinois, but, that's what Indiana's got in front of them, and that's the challenge they got to grapple with.
Absolutely. And coming out of this game, let's say they do come out of it with a loss. I mentioned the middle aspect of it, that they have to be fighting, because these guys read. They know what's what, and they know what the situation is and what's at stake. So if you go in and you do play hard and you give them a great game, but you still come up short, does that chip a little bit more away from these guys, or will they be able to maintain that and come back and do it again?
I just think Indiana's got to see itself play well again. I think you've just got to start there. I mean, it's been, the the sense you had, if you think about that 3-game stretch of beating Ohio State at home, which obviously a bit of the shine has been taken off that win, but the Rutgers game wasn't pretty, but you can sort of tell yourself a certain story that Rutgers, going to Rutgers is rarely pretty, and they muck it up. And, obviously there was the flagrant 2, and just Indiana just didn't shoot the ball well. And then you come back and you play so well against Minnesota at home. So it felt like Indiana was kind of in a good moment heading into the Purdue game, and to just kind of get, bulldozed, frankly, over both of those games. I know the Wisconsin game's a little closer, but let's be fair. I think Indiana was down 23 points at one point in the second half. To just get kind of, wiped off the, I'm sorry, forgive me, get kind of wiped off the floor in both of those games. I just think Indiana, sometimes the team, I think, just needs to see itself play well, and just needs that confidence back to feel that just sort of instinctive rhythm and that belief. And I think that, while it would probably be frustrating if you could offer Mike Woodson a credible 5-point loss right now, I'm not sure he'd turn you down, or I think he'd at least have a long think about it before he said no. Just because I think this team needs, just needs to find some of that confidence again.
And there's a lot of talk about the 4-point loss to Kansas, and yeah, that would have solved a lot of, or some of the issues that we talk about, but that would not have fixed everything that we're talking about. If they had just won that game and that was the only change, we're probably having pretty similar, same conversation. Not quite, but pretty close.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because you never know how a win like that could color the direction of a season. And I think about Tom Crean's 13-14 season, which had some similar. I think the team dynamics were different, but Indiana had lost a lot. They lost more players than they returned from the Big Ten title team. They had a lot of freshmen and sophomores. They played UConn in New York in November, and they lost. I mean, it was an ugly game. It was a terrible game from an aesthetic perspective. And it kind of just, neither team could make a shot, so it kind of just turned into Yogi Ferrell versus Shabazz Napier. And I think Yogi missed a 3 to win it, either win it or tie it at the buzzer, near the buzzer. I mean, I remember coming out of that and feeling like, what will we think about this game from the complexion of both teams' seasons down the road? And I'm not saying if Indiana wins it, that season goes completely differently, but obviously UConn goes on to win a national title that year, and Indiana doesn't even make the NIT. Sometimes games like that can have that kind of significance. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes it's just a game. Now, if Indiana had won that Kansas game, then I think there would be less urgency to be talking about having to go to Wisconsin and win, or having to go to Illinois and win, or, the other side of the next homestand, having to go to Ohio State and win, because Indiana would at least have that signature sort of quad 1 victory to kind of hang at the top of its resume. And it would be about saying, okay, now you got to add to it. Now you got to, fill in the blanks and fill in the gaps. But there's a really solid win kind of at the top of the line there. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. This is just kind of where Indiana is at this point.